So it's basically we're here for this reason, thinking this way. To use tools to help us develop our amazing potential for our benefit, but because we live in this world together for the sake of others. The bigger picture is that. Thinking this way. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyapsuchi Dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki Drona penche sangye drupa shok Sangye charang soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyapsuchi Dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki Drona penche sangye drupa shok Sangye charang soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyapsuchi Dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki Drona penche sangye drupa shok. And also because it's auspicious to offer, so we imagine the Buddha's here, we offer to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. Saji perki jugshing metog tramri rablingji ni de genpadi sangye jing du mikte uwagi drokonam dag jingla chapasho. And then we imagine Buddha happily accepts our offering. Hiram Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Well, okay. Our attachment pervades our lives. It's not sort of a cliche or a joke to say that being a Buddhist is being your own therapist. Lama Yeshe coined that, be your own psychologist, he said, So, because I think in our culture we're so used to absolutely dividing spiritual from psychological. We will never think they're the same thing. But for the Buddha, they're the same. He doesn't talk about an extra piece of us called a soul or a spirit. He doesn't use words like that. He talks about a mind. And really the job of being a Buddhist is to be your own therapist, but it's clear what the job is made really clear by the word Buddha, the end result of all this work. The end result of all this work is the word Buddha, Sangye in Tibetan, and the etymology is very tasty. This tells us exactly the job to be done. It implies the method. It tells us the job. Buddha, Sangye, the first syllable implies the utter eradication from our minds of all neuroses, all fear, all ego, all depression, anxiety. I mean, don't use all the fancy words of modern psychology, just keep these simple words that we all know intimately and well. The Buddha has found from his own direct experience that this stuff is not at the core of our being. And not only that, and that's radical enough, the second syllable implies that we can develop to perfection, quite literally, this is the Mahayana view, all the other stuff in our mind, love, wisdom, intelligence, compassion, etc. So these words are really simple. They're not complicated. But that tells us the entire job. That's the end result. That's how you would be if you were a Buddha, a Sangye. So thinking simply, using these words as psychology, and that's what they are, is quite a shocking concept. There's any of you in this room who are therapists, you would not, if you're studying, modern materialist therapy, which is the therapy of these days, psychology. There's no concept even remotely like that. If someone came to you and said, "You please give me methods to get rid of all ego, all fears, and all nonsense permanently, and have infinite love, infinite compassion, infinite wisdom permanently," you'd seriously think they were mentally ill. And that's not a joke, it's true. Because there's no model like that. Because we talk about the brain, the DNA, the genes, the brain especially. There's no view in science or neuroscience that you can get rid of all the stuff that is what we refer to as anger or depression or anxiety. Not possible. I mean, we tried it in the 1930s. We called it lobotomy. We know it didn't work. So this view is, but because we hear it as spiritual, oh, that's different. We put it in the sky, we mystify it. Which is really, I almost go to the extreme of trying to bring this stuff down to earth, because it's unbelievably important to do that, because it's real stuff that we really do on our mind every day. And it's not that, if it's not that, if you think, oh, spiritual's here, like I said, and psychology's over there, it's like schizophrenic. They come to the same thing. They come to the same thing. So if the end result is Sangye, rid of all the rubbish and full of all the goodness, if that's the end result, it's evident that implies the method. The method is and because where does that stuff belong? It belongs in the mind. So we better know what Buddha means by the mind. So it's helpful to even theoretically to know exactly what he means by the mind, because it's not the way we think. Many of us as Buddhists might never go into great detail and study Buddhist psychology. You don't have to. You can be a 1% Buddhist. It's really okay. You can take any of the techniques and use them up to. It's up to you. But if we go into it more seriously, we're going to see it's a radically different view of what the mind is. So just so for what it's worth, let's just put the bullet points. What is the mind and what is not the mind? Because this informs the way we practice, you know. Well, the first thing is that the word mind and the word consciousness, broadly speaking, are used synonymously. In different contexts, but they're virtually synonymous. First. Second, implied already by the end result, Buddha, clearly the potential of this mind of ours is quite radically different from the way we tend to think in our culture. In other words, in our culture, in all our models of the mind, and including in neuroscience, which informs psychology, obviously, we give equal status to attachment, anger, jealousy, ego, love, compassion, kindness, wisdom. We assume that a fairly rounded, a normal person would have a reasonable balance of all of these qualities. There's no concept that you can rid the mind utterly of one lot and develop to perfection the other lot. We don't even distinguish them. We know that some are mean, and some make us mean and depressed, and some make us happy and kind. We know that, but we don't have a view that, like the Buddha's. It's quite different. So the potential of the mind, the most radical of all, Buddha's view. Third point, these words are synonymous, its potential is totally different from the way we think. Third, this consciousness of ours is necessarily not the brain. It is not a function of the brain. The brain and the mind work intimately, inextricably, and intimately together at a gross level. But the Buddha would assert, another point about the mind, that we have these much subtler levels of consciousness, subtler levels of mind that do not need a brain for their functioning. And that too is quite a concept. That's why we think it's religion, because it doesn't fit with the view of the mind being the brain. And this is coming from the Hindus, well before the Buddha. This was already established in India, you know. As His Holiness said a few years ago, and I quote it a lot these days, it really made me think, you know. It was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. Thousands of years ago, before the Buddha. He came out of that extraordinary tradition. But like in our culture, you know, meaning the Judeo-Christian culture, usually that's what we mean by white, even though Jesus wasn't even a white person, was he? We go back to we love the Greeks, don't we? We go back to the Greeks. All our fancy words are in Greek, aren't they? That's what we know about. What do we know about Africa? What do we know about Asia, China? What do we know about India? Absolutely zero. Even us Buddhists, we know nothing. So this astonishing culture that existed before the Buddha, unbelievably sophisticated worldview. And that these great meditators and yogis were the ones who first investigated the mind, investigated the nature of self. They're the ones who created this technique that we vaguely know in the world as mindfulness meditation. It's this incredible skill, a psychological skill that enables us to completely subdue the grosser level of our consciousness, that is to say conceptual and sensory, and that's all we posit in our world, isn't it? To access these subtle levels of mind. That these amazing, unbelievable dudes before the Buddha, several thousand years ago, they identified it, they accessed it. This subtle level of mind doesn't depend upon the brain, doesn't depend upon the physical. It's not sensory, it's not conceptual. But this is mind. That's why we don't, indeed as a Christian, we might posit this other part of us that we sort of vaguely think of as more subtle, and we call it a soul or a spirit. Not for the Buddha, it's all mind. There's grosser levels, subtle levels, even these subtlest levels. So the word mind covers all of this, you know. Conceptuality, the sensory, the conceptual, and these non-conceptual subtle levels of mind, which we, in the long term, using this amazing technique that these Hindus invented. Because Buddha, when he diverged in his own direction, taking this technique, and of course he agrees with many of the positions they found. He didn't chuck it all out. He diverged in his own direction, in particular in relation to his own direct experiential findings about the mind. Tibetan's point here, you know, the mind. So we'll discuss this skill, this psychological skill. So the mind is not physical. It refers to all aspects of yourself, the entire spectrum of your inner being, from the grossest, the most positive, to the most negative, to the subtlest. It isn't a function of the brain. It's not a function of the physical. Interdependently existing, yes, clearly, the grosser level, not the subtler level. And the other point that's really quite shocking for us, that we don't give too much thought to, we just take as a given, is that it's the handiwork of someone else. If you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew, you are the handiwork of God. We know that. God puts the soul in there. I just learned recently that God doesn't put the soul in there for quite a few months for the Jews. So, you know, you're not a person until God puts the soul in there a few months after conception. But for the Christians, I think a second of conception, God puts the soul there. Now, if you're a materialist, you agree at least on one thing, that someone else made you. That you're the handiwork, in this case, of mummy and daddy. Buddha completely disagrees. Your body, yes, they gave you a body. That's very evident. But they absolutely did not give you a mind. They did not give you your love, your compassion, your kindness, your psychosis, your depression, your jealousy, your being good at tennis or football. They're all components of your mind. And so they're not, you don't track them back to mummy and daddy, which is absolutely the default assumption in all of our science, in our psychology, and we don't question it. This is radically different for the Buddha. It doesn't mean your parents don't play a role. It doesn't mean your brain doesn't play a role. It doesn't mean how they treat you doesn't play a role. Clearly it does. That's called the external world. But the crucial point for the Buddha, and all the Buddha's practice is dependent, is contingent on this, is that your mind is yours, and you didn't begin in your mother's womb. Your consciousness tracks itself. No, you know, in the Christian teaching, you track yourself back to God. In materialists, you track yourself back to your parents and mummy and daddy and the grandma and the monkeys. But for the Buddha, you track yourself back to yourself. Your consciousness has its own continuity. From this second, in an unbroken chain of mental moments, back to conception, and then before the egg and sperm came together, before that. This is fundamental, and this is the view of the Hindus as well. This has been part of a world view that's been around for several thousand years. Like I said, about which we know nothing. This is fundamental in Buddhism, and this is already implying. So one of the key things that's implied by this, the experiential implication of this point, and we'll go into this when we talk about karma, is that we come into this world programmed not with mummy and daddies and grandmas and grandpas' tendencies, which is the absolute view of our culture. We come programmed with our own tendencies. This is a huge point. So even, of course, we're not clairvoyant. We can be eventually when we do single point of concentration. Clairvoyance is no big deal in Buddhism. The Hindus discovered this by accessing these subtle levels of their mind. It's available to anyone. This single point of concentration technique is still living, existing, real, extant technique that people looking like you and me are doing right this second and achieving this single pointedness. And one of the consequences of it, I will discuss that this weekend. You know, it's very inspiring for us, I think. I'll be quoting from Lama Yeshe's latest book called Mahamudra. Came out last year. And there he talks, of course, about the nature of mind, which is very encouraging for us. Again, it's not how we talk, how it's got this marvelous potential, but how also this concentration, what a necessary technique it is, and the astonishing consequences of it, the remarkable qualities that we can cultivate, that we can access by accomplishing single point of concentration. It's available to anybody. If you work really hard, you get in a couple of years. You just got to give up sex, drugs and rock and roll and mortgages and things to do it, that's all. You can't do it in your spare time, unless you've got really advanced. So our mind is not physical, has much more subtle levels of cognition. And in the long term, as far as Buddha is concerned, we absolutely have to access those levels in order to do this job of unpacking and unraveling and then eventually ridding the mind of all the rubbish, all the voices of ego, and developing to perfection our goodness. And it's not the handiwork of someone else. It's our own. This is one of the most powerful points in Buddhist psychology, Buddhist philosophy. As His Holiness says, we're like the law of karma, which is this law that runs the universe, and the Hindus knew all about it, it's all there in the literature. This law that runs the universe, the law in which the universe runs according to. And it's a natural law, no one made it up. Buddha's not a creator. So when we take this view on board, then as His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, karma is like self-creation. So this is a massive point upon which all the Buddhist practice turns. That what's in our mind, and what indeed even is in our life, what we meet every day, is not coming from random events, is not coming from a creator, is not good luck and bad luck, is not fair or unfair. It is the fruit of our past actions. We are the creators of what's in our mind, and we are even the creators of what we experience in daily life. That's a pretty cosmic concept on the face of it. But this is fundamental to being a Buddhist. Of course, most people necessarily won't, many people don't even think about karma, don't want to know about karma. That's okay, no one can force us. This is absolutely crucial piece of the Buddhist big picture, Buddhism from the big picture point of view. But even just here, the application, the implication of this idea is very tasty. That what's in my mind is mine, and it's not set in stone, and I can change it radically. And why would I want to? Because guess what, folks? I want to be happy, and I don't want to suffer. And the neuroses in my mind cause me pain and cause me to make a mess of others. And the virtues in my mind cause me happiness and cause me to help others. It's kind of really fundamental, really straightforward. And it's got nothing to do with all the kind of moralistic ideas we have of punishment and reward. Because in Buddhism there's no punisher, there's no rewarder, there's no creator. We don't need creating, Buddha says. We do fine making our own mess, and we can do fine creating our own happiness. It's up to us. This is the most powerful point in Buddhism. That's what implied by this view, that our consciousness comes from before, programmed with our stuff. So therefore, and given the result, rid of the rubbish and full of the goodness, the job is to identify what the hell is going on in this mind of ours. This is what Buddhist practice is. This is when we become a Buddhist, you know. That's the actual job of being a Buddhist. Be your own psychologist. And that's what Buddhist psychology is about, this really deeply presented, vast body of knowledge about the contents of the mind, in a way that we do not talk in modern psychology. Because in Buddhism, the interest in the mind is the mind itself, not the conditions out there that we are mainly focused on in modern psychology. What happened to you? You know, what did they do to you? Your mummy, your daddy, the Catholic nuns, etc. The outside world is what we're mainly concerned about in our psychology. But the Buddha's expertise is the workings of the human mind. The workings of all minds, actually. Buddhist psychology doesn't refer to humans only. It refers to all sentient beings. We're just a tiny percentage of them, the Buddha would say. So, okay, what's this attachment? Pervades our lives. We'll discover if it's which heading is it under, negative or positive? Negative. So a friend of mine had never heard of Buddhism, and she heard about a course that was teaching on self-cherishing. And as we know, if we're Buddhists, it's the term they use for what we would say is simply called selfishness. And she thought, oh, what a nice idea, I'd love to cherish myself. She was quite shocked when she discovered it was not what she thought, you know. So in our culture, attachment is, we conflate it with love and closeness in families and friends, and that's okay. But what we've got to understand, and we all know this, words have different definitions. Like when I lived in London back in the 60s and then I lived in Australia, we lived in flats. But now we're all Americanized, so we live in apartments now, okay? We lived in flats. But let's say I've never heard of geometry. Never. And then someone says that's called flat. Oh, I've got to live there. No, we know there's a different definition. It's really not difficult to think, but we're so caught up in the meaning of this word attachment in our definition of it. And that's perfectly fine. You don't have to agree with Buddhas, but it's absolutely not Buddhas. And this is one of the hardest parts for us to listen to when we listen to Buddhist psychology. Because we give equal status to whatever's inside us. And we need to, otherwise we think we're a horrible person. If something's kind of evil, how can I own evil? We can't. So we have to say, well, it's a normal human being to be attached, jealous, depressed. It's a normal human being to be loving and patient and kind. So we maybe agree on that, but it doesn't seem, we know it's not so cool if you're a completely extreme of the neurotic ones. Then we've got problems. But the Buddha's view is, speaking not complicatedly, but it's hard for us to hear this, that there are some, he divides the contents of our mind into three categories only. There are countless thousands of thoughts in here. In fact, the Buddha's view is that there are 84,000 distinct, just neurotic states of mind. And then there are also 84,000 antidotes to them, which could be equally described as the virtuous states of mind. So basically he divides the mind, the contents of our mental consciousness, into positive or positive, productive, useful, valid states of mind, and there's got a real meaning in Buddhist psychology. And neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based, limited, delusional, disturbing states of mind. And he's very clear in that way of distinguishing. And it's not comfortable for us because that sounds like judgment to us. In psychology, we get very nervous about judging. It's not a question of that. Buddha says, you know, it's like weeds and flowers. You want the flowers, you don't want the weeds. Weeds are destructive. You can, very skillfully at the more advanced levels of being a good botanist, you can use the weeds, well, I'm sure. But we fundamentally know that weeds are the drag, they drag everything else down, they pollute the rest of the garden, and they strangle the flowers and the herbs, Well, that's the Buddha's view, very simply. So he makes this utter distinction. This is not how we think in our culture. Well, it is. There are certain words we use, But in general, the radical point the Buddha's making, and everything in Buddhist psychology has to imply this end result. The whole point of practice is eventually to be rid utterly, you have to hear this, of all neuroses. And this is such a shocking concept. A person recently at one class, and it's so true, when we hear this for the first time, she was shocked. But that's not possible, she said. You'd be insane, she said, because that's our view. That's our view. We assume it's normal. And what we mean by normal is you'd be abnormal if you didn't have it. So we can't conceive of a person who has not a fraction of anger and not a fraction of anxiety. It doesn't make sense to us because all of our models assume they're normal, so and we don't even need to be told that. We don't need to have studied psychology or neuroscience to think that they're normal. We know they're normal because we've recognized them since we're tiny. But the Buddha's view is they're not at the core of our being. And this is so encouraging. Like I said, in Lama Yeshe's Mahamudra, he talks, and this is from the more advanced teachings, it's very encouraging for us to hear about this pure nature, how our mind in its nature fundamentally is pure. What that means is that, as they say in Buddhist psychology, these neuroses, which are vividly there, look at your life, look at the world, but they're not intrinsic, they're not integral, they say, they're adventitious, they say. They therefore can be removed. This takes time to hear. Why? Because we assume that they are who I am. And our tragedy is, as we're going to get into it, our tragedy is, because when this stuff is dominating, when all the crazies in here are dominating, we really say, that's who I am. This is me. This is me. No wonder we're miserable, We identify because the voices are so loud. And we just assume that they're permanent. We assume they're at the core of my being. We assume they are what define me. This is coming from ego. This is the irony of ego. So it's powerful and encouraging to even hear there is a view existing called Buddhas that would assert, no, they're not at the core of your being. They don't define you. Yeah, they run the show sometimes. Look at the world. But that doesn't mean they're integral to us. This is a massively important point to think about. And then it can be encouraging. Then it's very inspiring, actually. But our modern views, our materialist philosophical views, affirm that exact point. That they're integral, that they're part of who we are, that we'd be weird without them. It's a very interesting point, this. It's a really powerful point, actually. And then we do hear about people who don't seem to be very angry and anxious and depressed and jealous, like the Dalai Lama, let's say. We put him up in the sky. Oh yeah, that's just the Dalai Lama, That's insulting. He's the proof of the pudding. He's a good example of exactly what we're talking about here. That's how they talk about him. He's done the job. That's how come after 60 years of living in a nightmare with his people being destroyed daily and still being destroyed, most appalling suffering in his country. After 60 years, he's still this funny fellow who cracks jokes about his torturers, and doesn't give up, and has never stopped for 60 years trying to make things better in Tibet. But we love to say, oh, that's just the Dalai Lama. That's insulting. He's showing us by his very presence and by his energy, this is what we can become. He's an ordinary human example of what we're talking here. So it should be encouraging to us. Like if you hear about tennis, and then suddenly you see Federer, you go, wow, look, there it is. That's possible. I can do that. That's the point about these examples. That's why I need teachers. In fact, that's why the Dalai Lama always makes a point of trying to sort of say that he gets angry, he gets depressed, gets upset, gets anxious, because we think it's too weird if he doesn't. So he's got to keep telling us he does, Or often they're very funny, the Tibetans are very humble. And one of the key things, you don't go on about who you are. You don't go on about your own qualities. You keep it quiet. You have humility. You don't own that you've got special qualities. Especially you don't say that you're a Buddha. Any Tibetan any of these lamas, these valid teachers would all say he's a Buddha. He's about the last one to admit to it. But it backfires, because the commonest thing they say is, I don't know anything, they'll say. And one time apparently in Wisconsin, that's one example, when Dalai Lama was there, and the person in the audience cried. and said, well, you don't know, if you don't know anything, what chance do we have? So he kind of backed up a bit and said he knew a few things. And it's actually very powerful. You notice these days, you know, that when you go to Dharamsala, he teaches there, he always, in his talks, which is only for us modern people, he always talks about what he perhaps when he was then he realised this and he thought that and he realised this at that point and that became very clear to him at that point. He got a bit of an understanding at this point. They don't talk that way. They never make it personal because that's just their culture. But it's necessary for us to hear this because it makes us encouraged. So it's so kind of him, you know. And equally admitting to be angry and things like that. So okay, the Buddhist model of the mind coming from these amazing Indians who mapped the mind several thousand years ago. And this is the point now, not map the brain, map the internal process itself. That's pretty cosmic for us. And you can't do that without single point of concentration when your mind is like a laser. That's when you can do that. And like I said, these techniques are still living, extant, real, being applied every day. So the Buddhist view divides the contents of our mental consciousness into three categories. There's no fourth category. Neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based ones. The positive, valid, reasonable, beneficial ones. And there's a third category that they refer to as neutral, but that misleads us. And I like to call them the mechanics of the mind. Stuff that, whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you need to function well. So, you know, you need concentration. You need good memory. You need alertness, vigilance. There's a whole bunch of these. And these are the ones that are developed in single point of concentration. The mechanics of the mind is a good way of putting it. Again, we're not talking the physical mind. They're states of mind. So the ones we're concerned with are the ones that are neurotic, ridiculous, and the valid, virtuous ones. And we have to learn to distinguish between them. That's the fundamental job of being a Buddhist. And then to do the inner work of deconstructing and changing these thoughts, these emotions, these feelings. That's the job. That's the job. Why? Because the first lot make you miserable and the second lot make you happy. And then on the basis of that, make you harm others and make you help others. And as the Buddha would say, we all want happiness and we all don't want suffering. So the first part of the work is for ourselves, and the second part, on the basis of this, we can help others. A bird needs two wings, Buddha says, wisdom and compassion. And the wisdom wing is applying these nuts and bolts of karma and the mind to oneself. Then on the basis of this, we can help others. It's a very practical kind of progression, you know. But before we even go into the mental consciousness, it's kind of interesting to, when you study Buddhist psychology in the monasteries, and we indeed as lay people can also study, you know, they're there, the texts are all there. They divide, first of all, the mind into two. There's two ways of dividing the way the mind functions. One way of putting it is that the mind, we have sensory consciousness. And speaking it out very clearly, it's that part of our mind, remember, which is not physical, that functions through the medium of the eyeball, the nerves, the ear, the skin, you know, the five sensory consciousnesses. So in one way, they're described in great detail. They are described in great detail. And they've got all kinds of functions. But in a simple level, we can talk about how the senses are really profoundly limited in their capacity for cognition. In general, when you study Buddhist psychology, you learn that all states of mind, their job is to cognize. Cognition is the function of mind. And we're talking here also emotions. We're going to get into this. Not just talking intellectual. To cognize. So that means all states of mind, often referred to as the subject. Mind is like a mirror. Lama talks about this in the book, in Mahamudra. The way our mind cognizes, this is very odd for us to think this way, the way consciousness cognizes anything, whether it's the senses or anything else, is as a mirror does. It's a nice analogy. The mirror, and the mirror, a mirror, we know, reflects what's there. And this is a crucial thing to understand as we go into more detail. It's a crucial thing to understand about the way mind functions. So, we have sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. So then the mirror always has an object that it's reflecting. So the senses, their objects, is pretty clear. Eye consciousness has two, shape and colour. Ear consciousness has sound. Tactile consciousness, rough, smooth. So they're limited in that sense. The objects of eye consciousness, for example, are merely shape and colour. This is already a very tasty point, you know. I always use my example. I'd use an example here, let's say, if I look at my thermos, and I am attached to my thermos, probably not a thermos, but it's like a thermos, isn't it? It's a generic term for cups that hold your tea hot, isn't it? So, it's got a blessed crystal in there. With Padmasambhava's mantra on it. Anyway, if I look at that, because I'm into design, I will say, oh wow, that's a nice design. I do say that, in fact. That's why I like it, you know, I'm attached to it. Now it's got a bump in it. It's very distressing. I'll turn it around so I can't see it. See, it's a nice design. This person who created this is very intelligent. You've got two lids. There's this one big lid because I'm travelling, so that never leaks. And there's a second one with a hole in it, so I drink. But this can seal it so it doesn't leak everywhere. Like I've ruined computers because of this. So, and secondly, this odd thing first, that I thought, well, that's really helpful. You think your hand goes there, it just sits nicely. So the person who designed this, I really appreciate them. Now the point is this. I say, wow, that's a nice design. Now, my eye consciousness can only cognize shape and colour. So the object of eye consciousness is shape and colour. So you have to ask the question, where does what part of my mind is cognizing a nice design? So a nice design is what is cognized by one part of my mind. But if my eye consciousness can only cognize shape and colour, then what part of my mind is cognizing what a nice design? Well, that's the mental consciousness. That's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa puts it. And it's like this. And you'll laugh, but it's true, the way they describe the mind in the texts. What happens is this. My eyes go here. And then you'll hear a sound coming out of my mouth. And that the sound will be words, won't they? And what are words? They come from thoughts. So there's a thought. The moment my eye sees this shape and colour, based upon what happens is, quicker than Google, and I really mean this, quicker than Google, the way they talk in the text about how the mind works is absolutely mind-blowing. Quicker than Google, my mental consciousness is accessed, and in a millisecond, there's no distinction, you know. My eyes see that shape and colour, then up come all the concepts stored in my memory. One of the ways they talk about the mind working in Buddhist psychology, nothing ever goes astray. As Lama Zopa says, it's like we're recording all day, or like one Lama said, like shooting a movie all day. The mind retains everything. It sees, hears, tastes, touches, smells, and thinks about. No, it's not a qualitative thing. It's just stored as memories. And that's why we can be clairvoyant, because our mind goes back and back, and what's blocking our ability to access that memory is all the rubbish. As you remove the rubbish, you can access all this stuff that's already in your mind stored. So already stored in a little bit in this life, the bit we do remember, what I like, the colour, the shape, your taste, the things you enjoy, the story. In other words, a conceptual story, because a word is the expression of a thought. A thought is a concept. So basically, mental consciousness for the Buddha, at the level we function day to day, we live at the level of conceptuality. And this includes what we call anger and rage and despair and depression and joy and bliss, which is a shock to us. But this is, again, a crucial point to understand, to really understand Buddha's model of the mind. That all the stuff that goes on in our daily life at the grosser level, from the time we wake up in the morning and until the time we go to sleep, apart from our sensory, is the mental consciousness processing and identifying and making up stories about the things that our senses experience. And they're conceptual stories. So Buddha's dividing these conceptual stories into these two categories, negative and positive. Deluded, disturbing, ridiculous, over the top, no basis in reality, valid, reasonable, and beneficial. This is not how we think in our culture. So it goes on the mental consciousness is thoughts, but because we're so programmed, there's never and for me because I'm a bit speedy, and even if I'm wrong, I'll have an opinion. Maybe it's a crummy design from the point of view of design. Maybe it'll come last in the design competition. But I think it's a good design, so I'll tell you my opinion, So basically what's in our mind, in the mental consciousness at the conceptual level, from the time we wake up until the time we go to sleep, including what we call emotions, with thoughts here, but all of this is conceptual for the Buddha, from here to here. And some of these conceptual stories have also are packed with emotion. They're the ones called the delusions, called love and compassion. When they have, that's when the body is involved. So a concept is well-designed cup. That's a concept. It's a concept. It's a thought. It's a conceptual story. It's a concept. It's an opinion. And so is, oh wow, he's my boyfriend. Can you be my boyfriend? What's your name?
Fidel. Fidel.
Who?
Fidel.
Spell it.
Castro, la Castro.
Spell it.
Fidel.
Who?
Fidel.
Fidel. Oh, and Fidel. Okay, Fidel. He's my boyfriend today. I'm so sorry, Fidel. If you want a girlfriend or not, but you've got me. So let's say I say, oh wow, Fidel is so handsome. That is exactly the same as that's good design. It's a concept. It's a story that my mind makes up. But this is the big thing that Buddha's saying, that all the conceptual stories in here, some can be sort of like rational, intelligent ones that we call conceptuality, like 1 + 1 is 2. Well, 1 + 1 is 2 is also a conceptual story that we have agreed upon, because we call it mathematical, so it's a law of maths. But basically 1 + 1 is a concept. It's an opinion about things. That you have one, you have another, and that equals 2. We buy into that as a truth. That's a conceptual story. Well, so is the idea that Fidel is a divine person. So is the idea that that's a handsome, that's a nice cup. Or if, let's say, he leaves me for a younger version, now Fidel is an ugly, horrible person, isn't he? Overnight, he's not even he's not older or fatter, but suddenly the same person that I thought was divine yesterday is ugly today. I mean, this should blow our minds. We know this is how we think our lives. We go up and down like yo-yos in our opinions. So that's what Buddha's dealing with, all these crazy conceptual stories. And we have to unpack and unravel these to find out what the hell is real and what is not. What is valid and what is not. And why? Because the valid ones cause us happiness, they're called virtue. And the invalid ones are ridiculous, are the ones that cause us suffering. So one way of framing all of Buddhism is in terms of being in touch with reality. Another way is in terms of getting happy and not suffering. Another way is in terms of living an ethical life. But they all come to the same thing in Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist psychology, Buddhist practice. And it's all made by our mind, Buddha says, and he's not joking when he says that. And he means over countless lifetimes. As a hypothesis, is a really powerful one. We're taking that one in this room. That our consciousness goes back and back and back, programmed with whatever you have thought and done and said every millisecond. And then we become programmed, not yet, a bit longer, wait a bit longer, have questions later. And then we come into this life programmed from the first second of conception with our tendencies, our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, these things. We'll go into karma in more detail. So we're interested in the conceptual consciousness. That's where the workshop is. That's what we absolutely have to learn to become intimately familiar with. And even if we are mostly Buddhists, we're so hooked into the materialist view, we're so hooked into the Western view. The number of Buddhists I talk to, and you ask about a certain person, oh yeah, he had a bad family, oh yes, the mother beat him up. We always look at the external. We're addicted to looking at the external. We're addicted to looking at the conditions. Buddha doesn't argue they don't exist. He doesn't argue they don't play a role. But his emphasis, his expertise, and ours needs to be what goes on in here. This is something that takes time to hear properly. It's very fascinating. But it's the last thing we'll look at, because we are addicted to looking at the outside. This is one of the main stumbling blocks for doing this job of being our own therapist. Okay, so we have a mind. It's not physical. Doesn't come from mummy, daddy. Doesn't come from a creator. Doesn't begin in the mother's womb. Goes back and back. Will not end at death. Goes forward, forward. And has much more subtle levels of cognition, which we have to, in the long term, must access. And eventually can be rid of the delusions and full of the goodness. This is the Buddha's view, very simply. And that this mind in its nature, which is implied by all this, if you can rid the mind of all the delusions, it's implied that the nature of mind is pure. Because virtues are at the core of our being. They can't be removed. And there's logical reasons for this that we have to look into, It's not just some nice religious idea. This is the general approach. We're going to go into specifics about this now. So maybe have questions, yes.
Robina, earlier you said the difference between the instinctual...
You have a microphone with the speakers?
You just have to one.
Speak up.
Okay. I'll repeat your question.
So my question was about the instinctual part and the cognitive.
Instinctive.
Instinctive and the cognitive.
Give an example of instinctive.
Sense-based.
Huh?
Sense-based.
What do you mean sense-based is instinctive? What do you mean by that?
I look at something and I create a thought about it.
Okay, that's not instinctive. That's just habit. What do you mean? No, okay.
So I'm coming back to saying the sense consciousness and the mental consciousness.
Sense consciousness and mental consciousness. So what's your question?
So you said that valid perception is sense-based, right?
I didn't say that. I didn't say those words. Valid perception is sense-based. I did not say those words. So what's the question? Ask me a question.
So if I were to realize something,
Ask me a question. See if you can make it a question. Start with a question, not even an assumption. Try and do that.
say I have to have a realization.
Huh?
I have to have a realization about something.
A realization is understanding the truth about something, whether that's 1 + 1 or 2, or whether it's emptiness.
Yeah.
So let's keep it really simple.
Yeah.
Go on.
So
The goal is to understand reality, all right? Whether it's 1 + 1 is 2, or whether it's emptiness. So let's just keep it simple. So the aim is to eventually have our mind in sync with what is true. Yeah?
Right.
So then, question?
Is it going to be a mental consciousness?
Yeah.
Is it going to be a sense consciousness?
Oh, it won't be senses at all. It's got nothing to do with anything. It won't be sensory. Nothing to do with it. The sensory has its role in our life, but eventually when you've accessed these more subtle levels of your consciousness in concentration meditation, which you need to do eventually, you'll start with the conceptual, which is the mental consciousness, but eventually it'll go beyond conceptual. That's when you have a direct experience of something. That's what a realization is. When you experientially know the truth of something. So speaking in a simple analogy, first you learn the theory, 1 + 1 is 2, wouldn't you? You learn the theory about dependent arising and emptiness, yeah? That's theory, that's concepts. That's concepts, isn't it? That's not sensory. Sensory has no role in that. It's the mental consciousness, and it's the specific level of it being conceptual, which is the grossest level, which is the level we function at, and that's conceptuality, stories, thoughts, opinions. You agree? So you have to have that first. Then through practice, you will experience the truth of it in meditation at a subtle level. Or with mathematics, you'll then go and prove it by doing your homework. And 1 + 1 is indeed 2. That's when you have a direct experience of it. It's all at the mental level. Initially it's conceptual, eventually it's non-conceptual, in the mental level.
Sense is never a part of it when you get that realization?
No, sense has nothing to do with it. Senses are just, no, because you're giving power to senses they don't have. Nothing to do with it. Senses lead us up garden paths. We give too much power to them. That's one of our major mistakes. We'll go into it more. Yes.
So we cannot achieve all those realizations without single point of concentration, right?
Say it again.
You said that without single point of concentration.
Without single point of
So we
concentration.
cannot achieve anything.
No, we've got to get that in the long term to have genuine, the way they saw, genuine, direct, experiential knowledge of something. It has to be at a subtler level in our mind, which is necessarily beyond conceptual, which is we only access that when we get single point of concentration. Yes.
So how come you don't emphasize that?
Well, darling, who doesn't emphasize it?
The teacher, they don't.
But I am emphasizing it right here. You're hearing it.
Yeah, but
This
most of the
second.
time you gotta study.
Well, that's how you start. That's the first step.
But I mean,
But it's because in the Tibetan tradition, they kind of, when they teach, they're teaching very long term. They're teaching long term. So you've got to start, when you're at school, you have to learn all the theories, don't you? You have to study the theories. You go crazy studying all the theories. But you know, like if you're going to study music, look at the amount of work you've got to put into studying the musical theories. It's going to play like Bach. The unbelievable complexity of all the thoughts. That's thoughts, isn't it? And you've got to study and do your exams. You'll almost forget to play the piano. You know you've got to eventually experience it by playing the piano. But it's assumed. It's assumed you have to do that. You can't become a Buddha without single point of concentration. You can't get any realizations without single point of concentration.
so how come like some sutras you had like the Buddha went and taught someone, then everybody.
Sorry, Buddha what?
Some sutras you had like the Buddha went to teach someone and everybody achieved realization.
Oh, because they were really advanced. Because all they had to do. It's like, I think, if you have, you can see some kids. You go on YouTube and you got these 7-year-olds, playing Bach. Well, you can argue that they've come from so much practice in a past life, they just have to meet music again in this life and they get the realizations. It's like that. So obviously all the people in Buddha's teachings were so ripe and ready, they just had to hear his words and they got the experiential realizations because they'd practiced so much before. And that means in past lives as well.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's why.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
If the mind pre-exists the coming together of sperm
Yes.
and egg,
Yes.
genetic union,
And that's right.
where does it dwell before?
It's okay. It's when you learn the death, when you learn the death process, there's a book of Lama Zopa's that's out now that's being redone as a paperback soon that describes this death process. And so, first of all, at the time of conception, what's your name?
Aurelio.
Aurelio. How do you spell it?
Aurelio. A-U-R.
Oh, Aurelio.
Aurelio, yeah.
Aurelio. Okay,
It's
good.
Italian.
Italian, yeah,
Marcus
okay.
Aurelius,
I hear
the
it.
emperor.
Aurelio. Okay, very good. Well done.
That's my previous.
So basically, if you think of Aurelio's consciousness as a continuity of mental moments, starting now, if you had perfect memory, you know that you'd remember every single second between now and yesterday. And even though you were asleep, you know your consciousness was there. It didn't just sort of disappear. And then the day before, and the day before. If you tracked yourself back, you know you'd go in an unbroken chain of mental moments, unceasingly, to the second of conception. So then the question is, what about the second before conception? Well, the egg was in mummy's body, sperm was in daddy's body, and God has nothing to do with it, and nor does Buddha. Your consciousness necessarily was at a subtle level at that point. And then it's at this subtle level, and then not long before that, you were in this kind of subtle state that's very much like a dream state. It's called the intermediate state. And then before that, you were in a previous body.
So
And not more than 7 weeks.
This is the bardo of birth.
That's the bardo, bardo is the name in Tibetan for the intermediate state, like a subtle state of mind. In the tantric teachings, they talk about we have gross consciousness, which is the sensory, and then we've got subtle consciousness, which includes all the mental thoughts, and then we have very subtle consciousness. Well, the dream state is like, the dreams is a more subtle level of mind, and that's similar to this intermediate state. Once you leave the body, you go into this subtle state. It's like waking up in a dream, literally like a dream state. But it's not more than 7 weeks that you were in a previous body, never more than 7 weeks, and you go back to beginningless time. And of course, we all desperately want a first moment of Aurelio. We all think I must have begun somewhere. So the Christians happily go back to God, and then if you're a naughty boy at school, well, miss, who created God? We know, you're not supposed to ask that question, but it's a very valid question, because the Buddha would say everything has a continuity. So if we're Christians and Muslims and Jews, we say God is the first, is the beginning. And if you're a materialist, we're still trying to work out the answer. When did everything begin,
So is the difference between the Buddhist concept of mind and the Hindu concept of Atman and the Christian Judeo concept of soul only different in terms of the creator?
Okay, no. Okay, so Atman and soul are virtually synonymous, aren't they? Self or soul. The Greeks call it an essence. There's always, different religions have different views, that there's some intrinsic, essential kind of piece of us in here that defines who we are. So if you're a Christian, that comes from God. The Hindus, even though they talk about reincarnation, all talk about God being everything, and we go back to that source. So Buddha doesn't talk that way. So you could argue, if you want to find an equivalent, loosely speaking, it will be what the Buddhists would refer to as very subtle consciousness. We've got gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, very subtle consciousness. That's what leaves the body at death and then enters into the mother's womb at the time of conception. Or no, roughly speaking, sort of like that. So there's a very subtle level of us, but it's not pure, it's not good or bad or anything, it's just a subtle level of cognition. So the difference is Christians would say it comes from a source, God. The Muslims would say it comes from God. The Jews say I think it comes from God, but I can never quite get out of Jews exactly what they think. They all think something different, even my friends in Israel. But the Buddhists would say your conscious keeps us going back and back. It doesn't have to go back to a source. As the Dalai Lama, with all his conversations with all the materialists, all the scientists, one time, this is just paraphrasing, he said to one person, about the Big Bang, Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. Because we want a first moment of the universe, the first moment of me, and it's a very strong misconception, Buddha would say, coming from grasping at things. It's ego's function to think there's some beginning somewhere. But it's a continuity of mental moments, and you cannot find a beginning, because it's cause and effect.
May I ask one more question?
Yes, please.
Now, the Dalai Lama, in recent decades, has been emphasizing the importance of science.
Yes, that's right.
Even of Western science.
Exactly.
Neuroscience.
That's right.
And I think he even said once that we should change our views,
Of course.
our theories,
That's right.
if there is scientific evidence to the contrary.
That's right.
What scientific evidence do we have of the subtle mind?
Okay, so what is, you have to fast, okay, so let's ask, so good, so we have to then define the word scientific evidence.
I knew that you would say it.
No, we have to say that. So, okay, we say, okay, let me use an example. One time, I notice we all ask the same questions. It's wonderful, we all do. But there's one question I've only ever had once, and it was a scientist, in fact, in New Zealand, who said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? Now that's a valid question if it comes to Christianity, because it all goes back to God. The information comes from on high, and it has to come from on high. It can't come from here, because that's the distinction we make. And he was very shocked when I said, naturally we all are, when I said, but would you ask Einstein who revealed relativity to him? And this is the point I'm getting to. We know, being what we call scientific, that relativity wasn't made up by Einstein. He didn't have a revelation from on high. He didn't have a dream about it. No one appeared to him and told him. He didn't make it up. He's not speculating. What he has done, and that's what we mean by natural law, he has observed the world as it is, and he's articulated what he has seen. Are you with me? That's what a mathematician is. That's what a gardener is. You look at the way things grow, and clever humans have articulated what they've observed, and then they prove it, and that's called laws. Well, that's the Buddha. He too has observed the universe with his mind, his own mind, and he's observed everything else, and he has come up with what he has found to be so. So now, we say, but Einstein has proved it. Well, excuse me, he might have proved it, but have I? So until I have personally been through the same experience as Einstein, relativity is merely a belief for me. But we make the big mistake in the West, just because Einstein's proved it, it's proven. Yeah, but not by you. So the Buddha's the same. He presents his findings, and the only way you're going to prove it is doing it yourself. That's literally the answer. But it's very kind of sobering, because we're kind of lazy. It's proved by Einstein. Yeah, sure, and lots of people since Einstein have proven it. But it's just for belief for me, and I live in a world that assumes it's true, so we're just blindly believing it. Until you know it yourself, it's just, as Lama Yeshe said, Four Noble Truths is not real for you until you realized it. So that the only way we can prove that Buddha is right, by doing the work ourselves, like Einstein. Einstein says, here's my findings. Over to you, baby, if you want to prove the same thing. Buddha's exactly the same. There's no shortcut. That's the answer. And as the Dalai Lama said, if as you follow Buddha's methodology like you would Einstein, and you tick the boxes as you go, and you might get to a point where you prove that Buddha's wrong, or Einstein, then you must reject the Buddha. Of course. That's why he diverged from the Hindus. He went as far as they went, and he said they still hadn't removed all the nonsense. There was still something left over. That's why he diverged into his own direction. All about the nature of self, the nature of Atman. So it's up to us. But start with the hypothesis first. What else? You can't leap into the truth. You can't play Bach. You can't play Bach overnight. You've got to learn the theories first. You can't get relativity overnight. You can't even get 1 + 1 is 2 overnight. You've got to hear the theory and then prove it to yourself. And that's how you become a Buddha. That's how you prove Buddha's right. Literally, there's no shortcut. But we prefer to say we believe in it because we're intellectually lazy. And then we think you can't prove it anyway, so of course I'm just going to have belief. Do you understand? Does that answer your question, Aurelio? Good, happy. Yes. Yes, go. Thank you. Go.
So we have thousands of thoughts. Every minute.
And even in the West, we say 1,000 thoughts a second.
1,000 thoughts.
Buddha would agree, baby.
And so these are the thoughts that are influencing my mental state.
Absolutely, yes. They're the ones that inform you. They inform your mental state. And we're not aware of 99.99%. No wonder we're nuts, you know.
Exactly. But if these are the thoughts that we need to apply the antidotes towards, correct?
Yes.
If they're unbeneficial states.
That's right.
But if so many are happening so quickly, how can we possibly apply the antidotes in time?
Because when you get sick of point of concentration. Until then you can't really get it. We can do an awful lot until then, because most of us won't get that in this life. Like I said, you've got to give up sex, drugs and rock and roll and be working very seriously for several years, full time. But it's there for us. Because when you hear how you'd be when you've got that, it's mind-boggling. You'd be an astonishing person. But there's masses we can do until then. Masses we can do. So that's where, let's now start to look. What time do you want lunch?
12:30 to 2 is what was on the schedule.
Okay, good. So let's now, okay, so let's just now, so will that do for now?
Yes.
General answer, okay. So we've got to start somewhere though, isn't it? We've got to start somewhere. So, in fact, where we start even, if we look at, as we know, this lam rim, this term that Tsongkhapa in the 14th century coined, for this way he packaged all of Buddha's teachings in a very experiential way. And we know very well he groups the different teachings into this order. And the first lot, as Lama Zopa puts it, Lama Zopa respects the lineage, so he would say that the first part of the first lot of stuff, which they refer to the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. Well, I like to refer to that as junior school, because we get that concept. The teachings suitable to the disciple of the least capability is a very big mouthful. But that's what they call the first scope of teachings in this Lam Rim package. So even the word Lam Rim, when we hear it, we go, yeah, what's that mean? Well, it's a course. It's a gradual path. We don't refer, when you study music, you do a course in music. Of course it's a gradual path. You grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and you eventually graduate. But the concept is foreign for us. So I like to just call this package, it's a course. You end up you graduate as a Buddha, and it's divided into junior school, high school, university, and postgraduate. Well, junior school and high school are the wisdom wing. And they're the nuts and bolts of what we have to do to work on ourselves. That's the Hinayana teachings. Then you go to high school, to university. University is the compassion wing. That's the Mahayana component. And then you have the postgraduate, which mainly you only get from the Tibetans, the Vajrayana, coming from India. So they're really good analogies because they help us see that it's all structured. And often we don't think of spiritual teachings as structured, but it's so hugely important to understand this. So what we're discussing here, being your own therapist, understanding attachment, understanding the mind, that's high school. So what's junior school then? Well, junior school is boring. It's doing what your grandmother said. Behave nicely, please. So the Buddha's saying, that's why they always talk in Buddhism about we've got body, we have speech, and we have mind. Well, mind is the point. Mind is the point. It's in high school where you'll get your concentration and you'll start to really do the job, or even some semblance of concentration. So you can begin to unpack and unravel the contents. But you cannot do that if you're out of control, if the servants of your mind, which is your body and speech, are berserk. It's sort of obvious. Look at a child who just, myself, anger was clearly, like my middle name was a little girl. But it was like, because it was so spontaneous, there was not a millisecond between my anger and my vomiting at the thoughts and shouting and yelling and kicking. So clearly, how could I possibly ever see my mind if I can't first understand and control and harness, and I'm still doing it, I'm nearly dead and I'm still working on it, working on my behaviour. Do you understand? Behaviour is what the body and speech do. And that clearly is the part of us that destroys the world. Comes from the mind, and that's what causes us suffering. So the first level of practice for the Buddha is control your body and speech. So it's very first entry level, junior school, grade 1, before you even do anything. Instructions are these 10 little don'ts. The first 7 of these bullet points, these 10 little don'ts, are suggestions to not kill, not jump on the wrong partner, and not take the ungiven. The Tibetans would translate stealing. 3 actions of your body that obviously are actions that harm others. The next 4 are actions of speech. Now in our culture we don't think speech even matters. You can get arrested for even just touching a person inappropriately, but you can swear at them and no one's going to arrest you, because we don't think speech matters. But these first 7 are body and speech, and these are simple but already profound if we can really learn to hear the meaning of this. And this is where we've got to talk about this first, because this again gives us the clear approach that Buddha takes. So on the face of it, it sounds like what we know, as I said, is what your grandmother tells you. Behave nicely, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Good communists, good Muslims, good Catholics, good Buddhists would all agree. But let's look at the basis for why you would want to behave this way. What's the basis? And this is a massively important point. So I've got a Catholic priest friend, a Jesuit. And I remember years ago asking him, by definition, what is a sin? What defines an action as negative, using Buddhist terminology? And it was very clear, his answer, and this is a massively important point to get. It's not being sectarian, it's just crucial to understand. He said, by definition, a sin is doing what God said not to do. What defines something as being negative is because God said not to do it. He said there's some aspect of natural law, like a person doesn't like getting killed. That's natural law. But what makes it wrong is because God said. This is a massively important point, because that's the view of morality in our world. And that comes from the Christian teachings. The Jewish teachings is this dualistic view of being a boss who is pure, who made us, and who therefore is the punisher and the rewarder. Now, you mightn't have faith in a creator, but excuse me, if you're a materialist, you have the same view philosophically. and you're in your mother's household and she says, don't do that, you know very well when you are smarty pants and say, why not? Her answer will be the same as God, because I say so. And you know if you don't do mummy's wishes, that's why you're naughty. So it's the same logic, and that is based upon the idea, that, and that's how we think about morality, which is why we're also neurotic, that it comes from on high. Someone says I shouldn't do it. It's mummy, daddy, God, the police, the judge, some vague they out there. And we live in that dualistic view of wanting, and because we want to be a good girl, why? Because we want mummy to approve of us. And why we try to hide when we're naughty. Oh, I got away with it, we say. This for the Buddha is really kind of childish. The Buddha would say, virtue and non-virtue, ethics, morality are natural laws, and it's got nothing to do with him. He, like Jesus says, don't kill, but the difference in his basis is why. He says, well, guess what, baby? People don't like dying. People don't like being harmed. He's like more like a doctor. You go to your doctor, and she will say, Robina, don't smoke, you might get cancer. Now, I don't say, who do you think you are telling me you're going to punish me with cancer if I smoke? We don't say that. We know she's being kind. Based on her experience, she has seen that the consequences to me of smoking is I will get cancer. So the Buddha's point is, yes, in general, a heavy negative action is one that harms another, but his real point is that if you kill Robina, that will harm you. And this is very hard to hear. That whatever I do, say and think, he says, and this is the view of karma, is a process of just naturally, everything I think and do and say is what programs me and produces the person I become. This is the actual law of karma. There are certain actions at the first level where he does demand we don't kill lives, or don't, he suggests it, like a good doctor. He would define a heavy negative action as one that does harm another, but the real reason, the real purpose, the real basis for his instruction at the beginning, his advice to not kill, is because, Robina, that's going to bring consequences to you. This takes us time to hear. This is the law of karma, and I want to go into this before we get to the mind, you know. This is a huge one. No, not for now. Huge one, really huge one. And we've got to really hear this. So the Buddha's view is that whatever I say and I do and I think, forget the impact it has on others. The first thing he gets us to see in this first stages of practice, which is junior school, is that guess what, Robina, whatever you think, whatever you say, whatever you do, is what programs you, is what turns you into a person like those actions. We get this. We understand this when it comes to food. You know very well that eating good food doesn't get you to be rewarded. It's a natural consequence of good health. And you do it because you want good health. It's a natural law that what you eat produces the body. Well, Buddha says it's a natural law that what you think and do and say produces you. That's the meaning of karma. And this takes us time to hear. Because we hear it as punishment and reward. We're addicted to that view. We are addicted to that view. Buddha's not saying it, but we hear it that way. Because that's the usual view we have of morality. You know, being punished and rewarded. Which is why we want to be seen to be a good girl so we get praise, and we want to hide our naughtiness because then we think we get away with it. Well, that's as ridiculous as thinking when you come home from the doctor and you notice she's not there. Oh, how come the Marlboros? I won't get cancer. She doesn't see me smoke. No, that's a joke. It's a laughable, isn't it? We know it's a natural law. That's Buddha. It's a natural. He's got nothing to. He's not a creator. He says we don't need it. We impose that idea, he says. We do fine making our own mess, and we do fine creating our own reality, our own happiness. We're the boss. We are the boss, Buddha says. There's a pretty intense concept, I tell you. So it demands accountability. There's no one to blame. That's why in general among Tibetans, and there's not much anger, they say. Dalai Lama says he's sad that more and more Tibetans are getting angry, which means they're just becoming samsaric like the rest of us. Because they don't have a view of anger. Why would you have anger if why would you say, how dare you do that to me? When you know you did it to yourself. The anger doesn't exist. Anger is a conceptual story, which you're going to get into, that thinks it's shocking that bad things happen to me because I don't deserve it. Well, don't be silly. We all get what we deserve. Not being mean. He doesn't talk like that. We talk that way. It's so heavy. Because it's called cause and effect. It's a natural law, Buddha says. It's a natural law that negativity produces suffering and positivity produces happiness. That's one way of framing the whole of Buddhist practice, from here to Buddhahood. So to hear in the simple way this way takes us time. We've got to unpack our own misconceptions, our own drama, our own guilt and shame and neurosis, which is a function of ego. Are we communicating here? So the first level of practice, back off, and at least don't kill, don't steal, don't jump on the wrong partner, don't lie, don't badmouth behind backs, don't abuse, and don't rabbit on about nothing. 7 baby actions. So what's the consequence for you? You become a happy, wise, grown-up, self-respectful person. Guess what? As Lama Zopa says, the rats and roaches will have a party because you leave them in peace. But you're the main beneficiary. Junior school is for your benefit. This takes time to hear. But we feel guilty. Oh, that's not spiritual. That sounds selfish. Well, excuse me, no one accuses you of being selfish if you want to eat well. They praise you for your intelligence. Well, morality is you know, acting well for your sake, because you produce you. There's no punisher in Buddhism. There's no rewarder. There's no concept like that. There's no concept like that. No concept. We constructed that idea. Buddha says it's artificial. We made it up. So first level is about karma. So, if then an action that's labelled negative, which is a heavy one in the case of harming another, would be an action that I do with my body and speech motivated by a neurosis, motivated by a ridiculous negative state of mind. That's called a negative action. Now, if it's called a complete negative action, there have to be 4 things in place when you do it. And a complete negative action would leave a seed in your. You've got these 4 bank vaults, and it would leave a seed in your main bank vault, such that eventually, at the time of death, one of those seeds will be the one that is triggered that will determine the next womb you go to. So, okay, so an action that's got these 4 components will be called a complete action. And it will be the complete result of a type of rebirth. Animal realm, other realms, or human realm, whatever. So, let's just use a positive action. It's the same logic. So let's say, Aurelio has a mouse in his kitchen. And let's look at a complete negative action that Aurelio might do called a positive action of non-killing. So that would be the 4 components. 1, there has to be an object, a real living being called a mouse. 2, and this is the crucial piece, is his mind involved in the action. And this is just keeping it very simple. There's more to it than this, but this is really simple. There's 2 parts there, and these are crucial to understand. The first part is, I will save that mouse. And the second part is his motivation. And in this case, it's called compassion. Oh my God, why? Why, Aurelio? What do you want to save the mouse for? Oh, the poor thing might suffer. Look. So the second part is intention and motivation. Intention, I will. Bare bones intention, I will. Volition. That's the meaning of the word karma. Karma starts with the thought, I will. Me walking out that door, if you see me walk out that door later, you can guarantee that there was first the thought, I will walk out the door. Unless someone has a gun behind my back forcing me. The mind runs the show. Intention is the real meaning of karma. Mental action. Intention, karma means action. Mental action. That starts the ball rolling. As Lama Zopa says, everything exists on the tip of the wish, the thought, I will, volition. But we have about 1 million of those a second, and that's our problem. The second piece is the motivation. And that in a way is the most important. So in Aurelio's case, the first is the object, second is the mind involved, third is the action. He catches the mouse, and fourth, he releases the mouse. That's a complete action of non-killing. You with me, people? And you can flip that over to exactly the same as an action of killing. And again, the crucial component in general in that action for Aurelio, for it to leave a karmic seed in his mind, is the second piece. So let's say Fidel has a mouse in his kitchen. First point, there is a mouse. Second point, intention to not kill it. No, there's no intention because he doesn't see it. Motivation? No, because he doesn't see it. So the second piece is missing completely. Third, he happens to stand near the mouse, but the mouse escapes. And fourth, the mouse gets away. Well, the mouse is the same result as his mouse, but you created the virtuous karma of non-killing. He didn't also kill, but there was no intention and no motivation, so 0 karma. Are you hearing the point? The mind has to be involved for there to be karmic imprints in the mind, because karma is imprinted in the mind. Body and speech are the servants of the mind. They carry out the wishes of the mind. And that's the trouble, as you pointed out, 1,000 thoughts a second. That's why we're all crazy, because our speech and our body are berserk. And then there's no way we can look at our mind. So we've got to start harnessing the crazy energy of our body and speech. It's sort of obvious. Are we communicating here, people? Not quite yet, a little bit longer. I'm going to finish a few things here, and then we have questions about this specific thing about how we create karma. So any action we do that's a positive action is an action by definition that's motivated by love, kindness, compassion, whatever you like. And necessarily a negative action by definition is one that's motivated by attachment, by anger, by jealousy, and all the other 83,997 or something rubbish, you know. And because it's all so quick, and because they're all mixed together, we can't see most of the time what the hell is going on in our lives because we're not conscious. And that's what we have to learn to do, to become conscious. That's the point of this, you know. So in general, a negative action is one that, a heavy negative one, is one that harms another, and it's one that we do with our body and speech, motivated by a delusion. Second, a virtuous action, that the strongest ones are those that benefit others, and it's one that's motivated by a virtue. In general, that's the basic principle. But of course, it's clearly much more nuanced than that in reality, because there are 1,000 different situations, 1,000 different people, 1,000 different scenarios, and it's not that easy to pinpoint for each person, but you've got to start with the principles. Do you understand my point, people? Now the point here I want to make also is the role of number 2, which is the mind involved in the action, is so crucial in this, not just the intention. The intention has no kind of, intention I will kill a mouse or I won't kill a mouse has no energy in itself, but it comes along with a motivation. But we see them as so totally one thing, we almost can't distinguish. Can you see my point here? So you can have an example. Let's say Aurelio this time sees the mouse, but all the same scenario, but this is now called an action of killing. No, sorry, an action of non-killing as well. Listen to this one. First, there's a mouse. Second, intention. Oh, I must catch the mouse. Save it. Oh, yes, don't hurt it. Don't hurt it, Robina. Save it. Motivation. Unbelievable attachment because he wants to cook it for dinner later. You with me? I mean, if you go fishing, you don't mangle the fish because you ruin your breakfast. So you kill attachment. When you kill with attachment, it's done nicely, isn't it? Fishermen aren't brutal people. They like fish. You get my point here? When it's attachment, when you want to have sex with somebody, you don't, I mean, unless you rape them first, that's called anger. But normally you've got to seduce them and make them think that you like them. They like you, right? So you use nice methods so you can do what you have to do. So attachment looks benign. You get my point here? So the job of Aurelio, the second action, he's got intention, I will save the mouse, because he wants to keep it in the fridge for later. His motivation is attachment to cook it for me later when I come home from work. 3, he catches the mouse gently, and 4, he puts it in a box. Now that looks like he's being kind, right? Because you don't know his bigger picture. His motivation is lousy. Do you get my point here, people? Equally, you can say, you can do a so-called negative action. So in other words, in general, saving the life of a creature is a good action. But look at his motivation, and look at the result later. He kills it. But equally, you can all go argue, and in general, an action that's called negative will be killing a sentient being. But look at this one. This is very common in our culture. Let's say he sees the mouse, and he goes intention. Oh, I must kill it. Why? Oh, because look, it's suffering. I don't want it to suffer. So his motivation is compassion. We do that to our grandma. It's called, you know, what's the word? What's the word? Euthanasia. See, a fancy Greek word. Make it all, our fancy words are all Greek. Makes it look high. It's called killing, okay? So 1, there's a mouse. 2A, intention, I will kill the mouse. 2B, motivation, because he thinks, like most materialist world people do, that if you kill the mouse, you'll stop its suffering, right? And that's his view. He has the view that if you kill the mouse, the suffering stops. So he is genuinely compassionate. He wants to stop the suffering of his mouse. We do this to our pets. We do it to grandma. We mean well. We don't want to be mean. You get my point? It's called compassion. 3, he does the action for a dead mouse. Now, karmically, for him, you can argue he doesn't even create much negative karma at all because his motivation is pure. But as His Holiness says, compassion is not enough. Meaning well is not enough. You need wisdom. So wisdom, he will be clairvoyance. Which means he can see the mind of the mouse. He can see that if he kills it right now, the mouse will get a nice perfect human rebirth and meet the Dalai Lama and get him Buddha. Then good, please kill me now if you can see that. As not just a compassion action, but a wise action. But this is not telling us to go around with compassion killing people. It's just showing the power of the mind when it's involved in an action. In the Hinayana teachings, they still say there's some virtue, there's non-virtue there. No, okay, this is an example, of the story, we have the story, this is a typical Mahayana story of how even an action of killing can be so virtuous. And this is the case of the previous life of the Buddha. He was already a highly realized bodhisattva, had complete clairvoyance, understood the mind of this person perfectly, and he was on a boat, he was a captain of 500 merchants, and he could see with his clairvoyance this bloke was going to kill everybody and take everything for himself. So the story goes that he had such compassion for the perp, for the guy who was going to kill everybody because he go to the hell realms for eons. And he was so overwhelmed by the pain of compassion for this person, of course the 499 other people he was going to kill, that he thought, I know, I would rather kill this person myself to stop him from doing the action. I would rather take on the suffering results myself. I mean, that said, in the Mahayana teachings, not only was there no negativity, but because of the power of his compassion and the power of his wisdom, it increased, it purified his mind and it hastened his enlightenment. So, in other words, the argument is, even though an action of, generally speaking, an action called killing is negative, in general, an action called not killing is positive. But I'm using obvious examples here. When the motivation is different, it changes. So, in other words, the motivation is the key that determines the character of the actions we do. But in the beginning, there's no discussion about making yourself or having a good motivation. Just don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Just back off, and control your body and speech and don't harm sentient beings. Are we communicating here? The point I was trying to make is the power of the mind, and the motivation is the key that determines the character of the action you do, which in turn determines the seed you plant, which in turn determines the fruit in the future. And there are 4 fruits of karma. One is a type of rebirth. In that rebirth, unless I say human, and so for us, we can deduce, like Aurelio and the rest of us at the time of his past death, we can deduce that a virtuous karmic seed from non-killing in the past, which is the key cause of getting a human body, was one of the seeds that was triggered at the time before he even stopped breathing, which already programmed him to run to his Italian mummy's womb several weeks later when she had hopped into bed with his daddy, or wherever they hopped. Same with all of us. That was already determined before he even stopped breathing in the past life. Second, at the same time, was triggered all the seeds that would, the second track of karma is our personality traits, our tendencies. And this is where it's crystal clear they don't come directly from parents. All his personality traits, whether he's a psycho or a saint, whether he's good at tennis or football or loving or killing or lying, we all know our own minds. Those tendencies were triggered at the time before he even died in a past life. They were triggered before he got anywhere near his new mummy and daddy. His personality traits. It's a second way karma ripens. It's called intentions or actions similar to the cause. The first is called the fully ripened result, a type of rebirth. So look at then the next one for us is our intentions, our attitudes, our personality traits, our characteristics, our habits. Second one. Third track of karma at the time of your death was the seeds that are called experiences similar to the cause. Now look at our lives. Since we're conceived up to now, you think about it very simply, our life has consisted out there of people and animals and sentient beings who have been nice to us and sentient beings who have been mean to us. Think about it. It's really simple. This is called experiences similar to the cause. So we can all see, if you've got good tendencies, your mummy might share them. That's what she's done them before as well. But they're yours. You brought them with you. But look at how we're treated by others. Sometimes people have terrible suffering. People don't believe your words. Why is that? Your past lie. People believe your words. Look at Mr. Trump. Half of America, 50 million people believe him. His 60 million Twitter followers all believe his words, even though he's lying through his teeth. That's from his past truth-telling. People respect Mr. Trump. Lots of people do. That's because of his past humility in the past and respecting other people. So how we're seen and treated by others, that's the fruit of actions we did like that to them. Karma's pretty personal. This is one that's most painful when it comes to suffering, because we can be good people, we can see this, but be treated like monsters. Look at the world. Sexism, racism, how you're treated by others, beyond belief the suffering we experience. But the Buddha would say it's the result of actions we've done like that, but so are the happy results. Happiness, but this is the thing is we never think about what are the causes of happiness, You only think about what are the causes of suffering. So how we're seen and treated by others, this is called experiences similar to the cause. And this is a really powerful one. So the fourth way karma ripens, there are 4 tracks of karma, 4 bank vaults if you like. It's called environmental karma. So even though we do what we do, this is more subtle to understand, but it's all there in the literature to understand it, the literature. That even what we do and think and say impacts upon the physical world, impacts upon... Okay, we'll discuss this later. So the very way the physical world impacts upon you, environmental result, main cause, your actions. So let's say you're fat and healthy, and you eat whatever you like, and it nourishes you. The air's lovely, the water's tasty. You have don't get very sick. That's from past non-killing. Second, people don't kill you, or you're not dead yet, and people haven't killed you. Main cause, your past non-killing. Third, you don't have any tendency to kill or to kill. Main cause, your past non-killing. And you've got a human birth, main cause, your past non-killing. So we are literally the creators of our experiences. But these 4 ways that karma ripen is powerful to help us understand karma. We just go, oh, it's karma. That's like saying, oh, what's going on in that garden? Oh, it's botany. Yeah, how does it work? I don't know. What good is that? You've got to learn it. You've got to learn even the basics of karma. It's a natural law that runs the universe, Buddha says. It's a natural law that runs the universe. It's a natural law that the universe runs within. And no one's running it. It's a natural law, Okay, so now questions. Come on. Yeah. And yes, 2 there and 1 here. And yes, please go. Yes, darling.
First, thank you for coming to this, Amaja.
A pleasure.
So, you mentioned the 4 things involved with karma. The intention of doing an action, when we keep doing it, it starts to become a habit.
That's right, exactly.
So at some point we do it habitually.
That's most of what we do and think and say is already programmed, is already habit, yes.
Does that make it less?
Makes it heavier.
It makes it heavier.
Yes, yes.
So
when it's negative, and it's good when it's positive, it's more powerful as well.
can you explain a little bit like how because I know that that's part of why we practice mindfulness.
That's right.
We could catch ourselves.
Start to be aware of the mind and change our habits, that's right.
But how does intention play at that moment?
Okay, I understand. It's almost a mistake to call, like as Alex Burden said, intention just doesn't convey. It's more like an urge to do something. So when something's habitual, you can see that if you've practiced something so often, you do it automatically. That's really what instinct is. I think about that, like say you're really good at playing the piano. You no longer have to look at the music, do you? You no longer have to think, I will now play C, I will now play B. You don't do it because you've so practiced it, so to perfection, haven't you? And that's why your music is so powerful. It's clear that when it's habitual, the virtuous and the non-virtuous actions are more powerful when it's habitual. So look when you play piano. It's completely spontaneous now. Why? Because you've practiced it. It's beyond intellectual, isn't it? So that's why your music can have so much power. You get my point? So the same, and it's beyond intention. In general, there is intention there. If you didn't have intention, okay, intention is there every millisecond. Every millisecond. But because we've programmed it so much, it doesn't seem evident to us. It's there, because it's instinctive now. So it's the same with negative actions. If you do something spontaneously and naturally, and because you're so attracted to it, and you've done it for so often, you'll even see it as good. So that's why it's so heavy. And then motivation is also there, completely coming along with it. It's very powerful. And it's much harder to see you've got a mistake. So, for example, even the way, this is where karma, when it gets how it even begins from the time we're born. This is why, okay, there's an example I always use, 2 examples I use about habit. The 2 children. This is years ago, I've had these examples. Both mothers, I knew the mothers. And one of them, her little boy, from the time he was tiny, when he first went fishing, he fell in love with fishing. Mummy didn't teach him to fish. He suddenly met fishing, and we can deduce the karmic seed was there from the past of having killed. The millisecond he saw the fishing, the millisecond he saw it, a very, very, very pleasant feeling arose in his mind, instantaneously. And that's from the habit of familiarity with killing. And the next second, attachment took over, and I'm going to talk about attachment, that then exaggerated the deliciousness of the fishing. And then naturally, because everybody wants happy feelings, and fishing seemed to trigger happy feelings, and he doesn't question this process because it all happened in like a millisecond, so of course he naturally decides to keep going fishing. And that means then, because attachment makes it look delicious, so all the years he went fishing, he never saw suffering fish. because attachment makes up its own fantasy story. We'll go into this more later. So equally, so that's because of the habit of killing. So not only did he have the habit of killing, he enjoyed it so much, it gave him such pleasure, so he called it good. Of course you would. Do you see my point? Now, if the world judged him, he would have felt very differently. Let's say he was attached to killing poodles. He would have been in trouble. He would not have happy feelings. He would have happy feelings, but he'd have to do it at night, have to be in secret, because he'd get thrown into prison if he killed poodles. So, you know, so that's how much more powerful, because it looks good in the end. Any habit we have, a person who has the habit to torture, it brings pleasure. Pleasure is what we all want. So whatever the action is, we assume it was a good action because it brings pleasure. We don't question. And our pathetic habits of just eating too much cake, look at us, how we have no control even over that. Because we want the pleasurable feeling. Pleasure is the bottom line. We're going to go into this later. And now on the other hand, another friend of mine, her little boy, 3 years old, and she's taking the lice out of his head. And he's crying with compassion for the lice. Mummy, mummy, don't hurt them, it's their home, leave them alone. And he's like 40-something now, and he's never killed a living being. So we can deduce with him, he had lived in vows of not killing in the past, woke up this life, not just with no wish to kill, but with compassion. I mean, look at the difference. So habit is way more powerful than just doing it occasionally. Because it determines your whole life, it's the way you see everything. So it's much heavier good karma and much heavier negative karma. Because it's so deeper, so much deeper, and never questioned. Do you understand? What else? Behind, yes.
Would you comment on vegetarianism?
Yeah, I will. I'll do that. But before I do that, person behind. Yes, darling.
Do you have multiple...
Bit louder, sweetie.
Do you have multiple intentions for one action?
Well, you know, when we call an action, we think of it as like a 10-minute event. But we're talking here every millisecond is an action, every millisecond is an intention, and every millisecond there's motivation. But they all kind of cohere together and then cause us to do that action of going down the shop and buying the cake, which takes 10 minutes. So every millisecond, these are all working away. It's way more subtle and precise than how we think about it. But yes, in general, we can have mixed, you know, I mean, we can have mixed feelings about something. Of course we can. But that's why we've got to have a lot of clarity and a lot of decision and know what is a negative one and what is a positive and try to make firm decisions. And that's not easy, that's very advanced. But that's what we have to try and do. Do you understand? So, yes, go, yes. Yes.
My question has
Bit louder, darling, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. My question has to do with the power of speech. You had mentioned several times that the power of speech involved, you know, intention, motivation, and speech is very, very powerful. But speaking directly to it, I mean, right now in the world, people are talking out of both sides of their faces. If they're talking, I mean, they're speaking a lot of nonsense.
Yeah.
Some people are speaking it out of emotion, and some places it's to a point where people are just like off the cuff throwing things out.
Yeah.
And my partner actually does that a lot, and every time he does it, it's like, ah!
Yeah, exactly.
You know, but I don't know if that's me being neurotic.
So what's the question?
Well, the question is, if you would mind speaking to the power of speech.
About speech, yes, definitely. Absolutely. We can see for most of us maybe we're not rapists and murderers and terrorists, okay? But look at our speech. And we don't think it matters very much. But look at if we have problems at work, problems in your relationship, because it's speech. Because we vomit out what we feel. And in our culture we kind of honour that. We call it sharing, you know? And we see it as virtuous. So that I think, and part of the reason we emphasise speech so enormously, the necessity to do it, is because we're not aware of our thoughts before they come out our mouth, because we're not paying attention. So we feel we only know what we're thinking when we speak it, which is why we have to go to therapists, because we don't have methods for unpacking our mind. So when we think of controlling your speech, we think of it as suppression. Therefore you're trying to hide, then you're hiding, because we have two methods, vomit it out or suppress. But this is the third one for the Buddha, is just having this super awareness of what the hell is going on in our mind before it gets to the mouth. That's the really powerful thing. And that's what takes time. So in general, they talk about the main gift of the Buddha is speech. That's the power of speech. Now in general, in our lives, we know we need speech just to work, to get anything done, to walk into a shop. You've got to have speech that people even want to listen to. If you have speech that no one even wants to listen to, and look at suffering of the world, it's like that. If people don't like your speech, or they don't trust your speech, or they don't believe your speech, we're in big trouble. So speech is super necessary to have. So how do we get better speech? How do we get the power of speech? Well, first, silence is a really good one. And the next one is at least practicing not lying. Not saying rubbish, meaningless, boring words. not using abusive language, and not saying bad things about people behind their backs. That's the 4 things. So even having one day, if you practice this, it is profound. We wouldn't speak hardly at all. So it's really a super practice. I mean, it's a super practice, but we just think it's so boring, speech. I'm allowed to say what I like, we say. We don't value it at all. We don't see and because we don't have the view that everything I think and do and say programs me, we don't think it, we just goes in, we think it goes in one ear and out the other. And because we're all so talented and so well read, and we read garbage, we speak garbage most of the time. It's endless opinions. We haven't got a clue if we're right most of the time. We're misleading each other. It's like a nightmare. So speech is unbelievable, and there's these lovely practices. Maybe we'll do the meditation this weekend called blessing the speech, using the Sanskrit syllables, which is the basis of mantras. It's said to be super powerful to make our speech powerful and more virtuous. It's a very incredible practice. I'll just use my example of my own family, you know. There's 7 siblings, all close in age. My mother had 8 babies actually, 1 died. 7 girls and a boy. And we're all about the same, we're born in, she had 8 babies in 9 years, you know. So we're very close, we're all old together now, you know. So anyway, the point is we're all very volatile, like me, all speak fast and bossy and like that, all of them, all of us, probably pretty much. My brother's the last one, he's the quietest. He had 6 bossy sisters, what can you do? Anyway, the point is we were brought up in we had no money, we had so many babies so quickly, and she sent us to the most fancy Catholic convent. I always joke about that. I mean, she still owes the bills 70 years later, but never mind. But what I'm getting at is we're a big bundle of family, right? And naturally you all chunk together, because we all plonk the children together, don't we? I mean, it's like the worst thing you can do. 7 little personalities all trying to survive. So we fought and shouted and yelled. I mean, I shouted and yelled mostly. Everyone had different methods of doing things. One was anorexic, and one had asthma, and we had our own modes of dealing with things, you know, and I was the bully. So we were always fighting, but we had good sort of solid morality between us. And so when we started, we all left home, we did our own things, and we come back at Christmas, so that's our Thanksgiving, and we fight. So I would say the last 15, 20 years, there's been conscious, an unspoken agreement. We do not speak bad things about each other to each other, and we all speak on the phone and FaceTime and things. And we do not speak about things together where we would fight. So we don't fight. So over the years, there's this enormous harmony. And we even rejoice. I mean, with siblings, we don't rejoice in each other often. There's always all the rivalries and the rubbish. We consciously even rejoice in each other's good qualities now. It's quite remarkable to see it. And the sweetest of feelings. We don't spend that much time together, but we often do. But it's conscious over the years. I mean, look at the schisms in families. Look at the pain. And it's all because of speech. Because, you know, once you've said it, it's too late. So speech is stupendous. Look at Buddhist organisations. A number of Buddhist centres I go to, and we're, you know, might be the best Buddhists in the world, but we can't control our speech and blame this one and say that one and talk behind backs and disharmony. It's just terrible, you know. Do you understand? I mean, one of the big schisms in our organisation 40 years ago, 35 years ago in a big centre, Lama Zopa said, this is the result of one of the broken vows about speech, you know. Bad-mouthing people. So speech is really powerful. Even forget the long-term result, but just in a day. I mean, if you shout and yell every time you feel something and say something, or vomit out whatever you feel, you know, or speak something bad behind people's backs, by the end of the day, forget what you've done to others. You're exhausted. So it's such a powerful practice. We just don't pay attention to it. We think it doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. I'll say what I like, you know. It's rubbish. And then we all know, if because we use speech in our lives, if people don't value your speech, it's so painful. Well, but I said the truth, they don't listen to me. You know, that's because of our speech. That's part of the karma. You understand? Yes.
Freedom of speech. That's what you're talking.
What do you mean by that?
No, I'm just saying.
Huh?
I was saying.
Don't make up stuff unless it's important. So what are you saying? I mean, freedom of speech. What do you mean? Come on.
I'm not talking about speech. I'm talking
What?
about something else.
Be quiet. Shush. It's not important.
So my question is.
He's got a question. Okay, it's important. Go on.
What?
What? Say it. What?
How do we get single point of concentration?
Darling, we'll discuss that later. Come on.
In 2 years.
By giving up sex, drug and rock and roll, by controlling your body, speech and mind, by living in vows, doing masses of purification, learning Buddhism from beginning to end, understanding emptiness, understanding Dharma, then you're ready to go and start delving into this insanity of your own mind and learn to control it. It's quite advanced.
In 2 years?
If you really got the karma there and the merit, yes. But I mean, you know, it takes years and years. I mean, even the highest, even Pamonka Rinpoche says in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, you can do it in 6 months. Just talking back in the 1920s to these developed people, you know. But it's pretty, to even get anywhere near wanting to even go up there to the mountain, you've got to have done so much practice already, don't you? I mean, who's got a mind that, you know, one of the criteria there are several criteria. One criterion is that you have completely given up any attachment to food. You eat whatever you're given. Second one is you have no interest in reputation, no interest in possessions, no interest in sex, no interest in music, no interest in all the family life, all the things that govern our lives. You completely, if you can walk away today without looking back, you're ready. Most of our lives are so complex, so complicated, so involved in so many people, that we're just not ready for it. That's why we've got to start somewhere and do 5 minutes in the morning. But to really seriously get it, you've got to be already quite advanced. Do you understand?
And how do you know you got it?
What?
How do you know you got it?
Holy Mother God in heaven, how do you know? If you don't know your own mind, you're insane. Put it that way. If you don't know, then you're insane. If you don't know you're qualified, then you're clearly not ready. If you're practicing music, and if you don't know that you've already done grade 1, how do I know I've done grade 1? If you don't, you haven't accomplished it. You're not ready. Do you understand?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
So you say that when we visualize, we see shape and color, right?
The sensory consciousnesses are very limited in their capacity for cognition.
Okay.
So eye consciously shape and color, and the next millisecond all the conceptual stories take over and describe it.
So
and that's how we live our lives.
So we don't see beautiful, we don't see ugly.
Of course, the eyes can't see any of that. I mean, okay, there's a certain way they do talk, that they have some capacity for this, but in general, these senses are like dumb animals.
Okay.
And our problem is, we don't realize that we're making up a conceptual story about handsome Fidel. We think he is in his bones handsome. And then when you leave me for a younger version, I now think you're ugly in your bones. In other words, we don't have any distinction between the senses and the mental, and we don't even realize we're making up stories. We just think what I see is the truth, and that's the killer. You understand? So we're driven by everything in our mental consciousness, and that's what we have to unpack and unravel. That determines every single, as Lama Zopa puts it, the way the entire world out there appears back to us, in other words, in our mirror, is through, I would use these words, through the lenses of whatever's in our mind. So if I've got attachment, you'll look handsome. If I've got aversion, you'll look ugly. And our tragedy is we don't realize we're calling it. We don't realize that ugly and beauty are coming from my mind. We think they're coming from you. And that's the killer. That's what locks us in samsara. And to the subtlest level of realizing emptiness, this is what we're doing. Do you understand? Yes.
Please go to question.
Bit louder, darling.
I'd like to ask a question, or perhaps two, to clarify accumulation and fruition of karmas. Spoken about, it sounds like we would create millions of complete karmas in a human lifetime. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
And if one is coming to fruition in a rebirth, are we also getting the fruition of those karmas in other places in addition to a bodily rebirth? Or are we just full of infinite karmas?
I think it's so infinitely complex, it's hard to even say it. But if every millisecond we are creating complete karmas, and then each of those seeds will then produce, each of those actions will produce many, many rebirths. So that even if you, I would say, put it this way, if you stopped creating karma from this second, but didn't clean up your past karma, you'd never end. You'd like never end. It's like so complex, so subtle, so complex. So that's why in this life, now we've got a human birth, which is the fruit of non-killing, particularly non-killing. But as Lama Zopa says, not just being a good person, that's not enough. But no doubt he said that the karma that caused us to get this human body was practiced in the context of living in vows of morality in a spiritual practice. We'll discuss the power of vows in a minute. We can't get ahead without vows. That gives us such power to the actions we do. So then within this life, all the other billions of every millisecond is the ripening of some karma. And then every millisecond, upon the ripening of that karma, we create more. So it's just an infinite process. And that's why at least if we can start by, at least, as Lama Zopa says, the most urgent level of practice is stop creating more negative karmas, if we can, by stopping killing, lying, stealing, and living in vows, and I'll give you the reasons. And the next level of practice, still in junior school, is purify, do the purification practices that put atomic bombs under all past karmas before they ripen. That's what the main daily practice is, that abiding by the laws of karma, living in vows, and practicing morality and purification. Just being a good Buddhist and watching our breath is just not enough. It's not enough. Do you understand? Okay, we'll go on, we'll discuss more. Okay, we're saying a lot of things here. What to do? So I've only got a few hours, so I've got to say as much as I can. God, go.
The Buddha eventually ended up endorsing the middle way, which was not indulgence and was not asceticism. But there seems to be an emphasis on asceticism.
That's an interpretation of middle, but that's an interpretation of middle way. It's not the middle way that really he's discussing. The middle way he's talking about is the understanding, is wisdom of realizing emptiness. That's not the real middle way. That was it's this particular teaching he gave in the way that he lived his life. It was true, and that was more in the context then of this fundamentalist, extreme ascetic way of real. Whereas he showed, so that was a particular teaching, and that's often called the middle way, but it's not the real meaning of middle way. But here, it's not a question of ascent. Yeah, no, the extreme of this. Okay, keep it simple. Not killing and not stealing and not lying. Okay, not killing and not stealing and not lying. Why is that ascetic? Isn't that just common sense? Isn't that called good ethics?
No, I agree with that. But
there you go. That's all.
But with giving up all taste for food.
Who said that? Who said you should do that? I didn't say that. I did not say that. I never said that. What did I say?
Attachment with
One
food.
of the things that
Attachment to food.
you would do in order to become.
Oh yeah, I didn't say give up. I said give up.
You would not.
Attachment to it. Attachment is, that's what we have to look into attachment. Okay, now that we're starting the conversation, how attachment invades our lives at 10 minutes before lunch, okay. Let's start now describing the cause of all these problems, the cause of all this suffering, the cause of all the negative karmas we create. So there's 84,000 delusions, 84,000 kleshas, 84,000 disturbing emotions, 84,000 afflictions, as we nicely translate in English, but I never use that word because it's so medieval. So affliction is meaning a problem or an illness. And what kind of illnesses are these? These are called mental illnesses. So I like to use the term mental illness, although it's very shocking to us. So we have 84,000 mental illnesses. But Buddha, luckily, they all subsumed to 3, which is really convenient. As Ling Rinpoche recently, the reincarnation of Ling Rinpoche, the Dalai Lama's root guru from past life, he's traveling around America at the moment. He was in New York just now. And when I heard him in London, he said 21,000 of those 84,000 are related directly to ignorance, the first of these 3 root delusions, the 3 delusions. The second 21,000 are related to attachment, and the third 21,000 are related to aversion, and then the other 21,000 are related to all 3. So there's a highly complex map of the mind, basically. But let's look at these 3. I mean, they sound kind of cute and simple to us, but when we understand these 3, I tell you, we deeply understand Buddhism, which means we deeply understand ourselves, which means we can deeply understand other people. This is the essence of Buddhist psychology. Okay, these 3, and they have a direct relationship with each other, like I just said, the whole 84,000 do. The root delusion, the root affliction, the root mental illness, the root neurosis, the root negative state of mind is called simply ignorance. But it's a very specific ignorance, the most primordial ignorance about how things actually exist. And known when it comes to this ignorance about oneself, it's known as ego grasping. It's got this primordial energy of grasping. It's just deeply instinctive, deeply primordial. We can't articulate. There's not even a thing equivalent to this in our culture. It's this assumption of a separate, bereft, concrete, solid, set in stone me. It's massive, primordial, and it underpins everything else. So the main voice of that one, which is this next one, that's called attachment. and it's multifaceted. And when you hear this, you're going to recognize different facets of it, but they all come down to being attachment. They come down to being manifestations of attachment. So the main energy, so ego grasping is even what causes us to have a separate sense of self. So because we've got the separate sense of self, and it's necessarily miserable, it's not happy, then we naturally have this massive, this is the first energetic level of attachment, we're born with this, we come into this life with it, the deepest feeling of dissatisfaction. I am not enough, I don't have enough, I can't do enough, I haven't achieved enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not beautiful enough. No matter how much Fidel tells me he loves me, it's never enough. It's the default mode of never enough. And this is the main pain of attachment in our lives, and it's totally instinctive, and it's called dissatisfaction. And it's constant. So naturally, because we never feel we're enough, we have to, the next level is we hanker after something. We yearn for something. And what do we yearn for? And this neurotic yearning is for something out there, the objects of the five senses. What else? That's what life is. You know, this sense of I is this separate me in this lonely world, and it's all out there, and I've got to get it. So then the next level of attachment is this hankering after one of the objects of the senses, depending on the habit we have. And the next level of attachment is then it will embellish the deliciousness of Fidel, the deliciousness of the chocolate cake, and its function in making me happy. And the next level of it is then to manipulate and control to get it. And the next one is to possess it as mine. All of this is attachment, and it's running our lives, and it's primordially deep, nothing to be guilty about. We've all got it. Join the universe. It's called samsara, you know. And effectively in daily life, it's the main cause of our suffering. It comes from ego grasping, but this is effectively the main cause of our suffering. So another way of putting it, on a more kind of subtle level, it's this assumption, this deep assumption that I must get only the good things. And what the good things means is what I want. Attachment is an assumption that I must get what I want every millisecond. So it's a state of constant panic. Attachment. It's a complete nightmare. And if it weren't tempered by our love and compassion and kindness and generosity and forgiveness, we would be vampires. We'd be monsters. Look in the world and you see people harming each other. That's because of attachment raw, with not much, no mitigating love and compassion. And it's there all the time. And it's in a state of constant panic. And another way of putting it is attachment can only bear the nice things. It can only stand the nice things. It cannot bear anything that it doesn't want. And then what happens when it doesn't get what it wants, which is 1,000 times a day, that's the third of these. And that's called aversion. And that's multifaceted as well. The most obvious level of it is called anger. The milder levels of anger, aversion, which is the panic attack when attachment doesn't get what it wants, are irritation, annoyed, upset, frustrated, anxious, worried. They're all versions of aversion, because the millisecond attachment does get what it wants, it triggers a happy feeling, and we think we just got what we want, so we're cool. And then the millisecond it doesn't get what it wants, panic attack. Violent anger, vague anger, irritation, annoyance, frustration, and then internally it's depression and despair. This is entire spectrum. This is really subtle stuff, but it's not expressed in these simple words. That's why we've got to meat on the bones from our own practice. Lama Yeshe says, I can tell you about attachment for one whole year. We can never understand it until we start to become intimately familiar with it in our own mind from practice. We have to start with the definitions first. We have to start with the assumption of what Buddha's view of attachment. It's a state of mind that over-exaggerates the deliciousness of something. Aversion is the state of mind that is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants, that over-exaggerates the ugliness of something. And they have all these ways of manifesting. And it's constant. And all the other delusions are the results of all of these. So attachment is what we have to understand. All of them. But this is where this relationship between attachment and anger, in our life, we don't even talk this way. Because our main focus is on what happened to me when I was a child. So why am I angry? Why do I choose crummy boyfriends like Fidel who keeps cheating on me? So we go back to what happened in the past. We're looking for a needle in a haystack, aren't we? Because we are convinced the causes are out there somewhere. Mummy, daddy, children, the Catholic nuns, DNA, genes, you name it. We're looking and looking like for a needle in a haystack. Now we found the reason why Robina gets angry. Buddha's view is so much more powerful, so much more direct, but so much more hard. Because he's saying, no, Robina, Fidel might cheat on me. And this is where it's tough. But that's his problem. Now let's see yours. And that's called anger. This is really brutal and hard to hear. When we can practice, that's what we're doing. And that's why I have such respect for my friends in prison, working since mid-90s, Liberation Prison Project. I stopped running it 10 years ago, but I had so much powerful learning from working with people in prison. Why? It's because they don't have the luxury to leave their situation. So they're sitting there. You know, you go mad because you can't change the outside, or you change your mind, one or the other. But we are addicted to believing. When we're addicted to believing the outside is the source of our happiness and the source of our suffering, it's the same problem. Why are you happy, Robina? Oh, Fidel's so kind to me. Why are you unhappy, Robina? Fidel's so mean to me. We blame him for both my happiness and my suffering. That's the view we have. It's a philosophical view deep in our bones. Schizophrenic one. Lama Yeshe would say that. So to change that, to look into my mind, doesn't deny that he is kind to me. It doesn't deny that he's mean to me. That's not the issue here. That's why it's so hard. And my friends in prison understand that. They don't have the luxury to change their situation. So they change their minds. And this is what Buddhism is. The essence of it is that. So we have to understand these states of mind. That's it. It's fundamental. Utterly necessary. So that's before lunch. What we'll do before lunch. Yeah. What's the question?
So piggybacking on
what's your question? About this now. Not about something else. It's all past.
Don't kill.
What? That was before. You missed it.
Yeah, that was the question before.
Where? Who? Which question?
He asked that question, right? So my question to you is: don't kill, don't cheat. Karma repeats itself. Law of cause and effect, and so.
What's the question, darling?
The question is: should it be fear-driven, saying I'm going to pay for it?
Oh, sweetheart, listen to me. I mean, should it be fear-driven? If you are told by your doctor to stop smoking and she shows you a movie of all people who've got cancerous lungs, what would be your response first? Be shocked, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I don't want those lungs. You'd think that. That's called fear. How intelligent are you? At least if it starts you stopping smoking, well done, intelligent. So we can have enough intelligence to recognize that my suffering will come from my actions, then I would admire you. But we don't. We're as thick as posts. We just think, I can do what I like. So to have a sense that my negative actions will produce suffering for me, which is what karma is, none of us even know that. That's why we just keep on doing what we do, because we're so ignorant. So if you can start having some fear, how intelligent. Well done. Well done.
If you don't have fear, what happens?
Well, then you're like the rest of us, like an idiot, thinking it doesn't matter.
Well, you still understand it.
You don't ask so many questions. You be quiet, and I'm responding to you. Shush. Does he always do this? Anyway, have lunch. Okay, question. Go, darling. Yes, talk to me.
So I have brief moments of, liberation, and then I get attached to that.
Of course we do. That's right.
I want to keep that.
Well, that's good. Nothing wrong. That's okay. But then you'll get a wake-up call. Don't worry about it. We'll go into more detail later. Don't worry about it. It's okay. So the first level we have to, first level you control the servants of your attachment, if we can. Then we can start to see the attachment more. And then start being our own therapist and working on it, but with all the practices and things, giving support to it. This is just, the thing is that the real point is this too. This is, to be beyond attachment. You practically have realized emptiness by now, if you're beyond attachment. So it's a highly realized state. So you've got to have long-term view and not be neurotic and fanatic about it. We're going to have to, in other words, as long as we know what it is and you treat it with respect, then you learn to live with it. Because it's primordially deep. It's insane to think you stop being attached. It's insane to think now we can have a relationship without attachment. It's ridiculous. It's meaningless. It's too advanced to be this way. It's not possible. So one learns to work with it and learns to live with it. That's part of the process. And they learn to be rejoicing and delighting in our progress. This is so important. We'll discuss after lunch. So you've got to all go off and have lunch, don't you? Are there cafes and things? Good.
We have a flyer by the door.
Okay, good, very good. So, yeah, if you're going to go off with each other, then I'd love you to spend at least 30 of the minutes, if not a lot of it, it's up to you, discussing one or more of these topics. But don't just rave on about every book you read, but try and think of what we've discussed today and take any more of these topics and unpack it and unravel it and come back with questions. Then it makes lunch part of the deal, part of the course, yeah? I mean, I can't force you to do that. But try and stay focused on it, it's very helpful. I always quote this. My philosophy teacher, Geshe Tekchok, Sarah Jane, was the abbot. He passed away now. He'd always say, when I studied with him, he'd always say 25% comes from, understanding comes from listening, 75% comes from debate, analysis, thinking about it, discussing, and meditating. So discussions are so powerful. All right, you people? Good. See you in 90 minutes.
Thank you.
Then we make the most of the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.